followed by the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we'll introduce our speaker, if you would all rise.
As you join me tonight in prayer, I want you to think about a couple of things. I've been thinking about prayers. I've been asked by Diana to do this prayer many times, and I did some reading on it, and particularly if you look in Matthew, it talks about prayer and how you should do a prayer, and it talks about the Lord's Prayer, the prayer that we were given by our Savior. And I think the most important thing is that we, you and I, not say beautiful words, but have the thoughts that we need so that God receives our prayer, knowing that they're earnest and they're needed. So I ask you tonight, I'm going to pray for us, for you and me, a prayer directly to God, asking for His help and His blessing. So please join me if you will. Our Heavenly Father, we ask you tonight to give us help in this time of need. We thank you for all the blessings that you've given us in this great country. But now is a time of crisis in our country, and we need the forbearance, the knowledge, the wisdom, and the love to help heal our country. Give us these things in your name, that we may do your will. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, you may all sit. All right, so I'm going to introduce our speaker now. Our speaker is Lee Henderson. She started working for the City of Virginia Beach in 1996. In 2000, she obtained a BSBA in both accounting and finance from Old Dominion University. Shortly thereafter, she began working at the City Treasurer's office. She began her tenure in the accounting department as an entry-level accountant and then rose to accounting and investment administrator in 2009. From 2003 to 2017, Lee managed the city's investment portfolio with an average balance of over $700 million. In 2017, Lee was appointed as Chief Deputy Treasurer, and when her predecessor retired, that was John Atkinson, in 12/31/18, Lee became the treasurer. Lee is a certified treasury professional from the Association for Financial Professionals and a master governmental treasurer from the Treasurers Association of Virginia and a UVA's Weldon Cooper Center for Public Service. Please welcome our city treasurer, Ms. Lee Henderson.
Thank you, Diana. Thanks for having me here tonight. So before I start out, I'm just going to say I'm going to try really hard not to put you guys to sleep because a lot of my stuff is pretty boring. So I'm going to go through that quickly before I start on the real topic that Diana came and asked me to talk about, which is what the city, but more specifically my office, has done during the pandemic to try to help businesses through what's going on in our economic environment right now. So I just want to give you a quick overview of what the City Treasurer's Office does, and then I'm going to talk about some of the things that the City Treasurer's Office doesn't do, because that's important to understand about the responsibilities that I have, the perspective that I have, and the responsibilities of other elected officials. So just to do an overview, we're responsible for collecting and depositing the revenue for the City of Virginia Beach, which is about $2.6 billion that flows through my office. We collect personal property taxes, we collect real estate taxes, we collect trust taxes, and that's what I'm going to talk a little bit more about tonight, which would be admissions tax, meals tax, lodging tax, and short-term rentals. We collect state and estimated income. Am I not loud enough?
Speak into the mic.
Sorry.
I just went in the back.
I have a 12-year-old voice, I apologize. We collect parking tickets, we collect miscellaneous invoices. We work with all the departments in the city for collection of, for example, animal control, school board for cafeteria funds and lost textbooks, items like that. Stop arms, school bus, camera citations, red light citations, police false alarm violations, DUI cost recovery, fire department inspections, fire department permits, facilities management, rent and lease payments for if the city rents property, we collect on that as well. We work with all of the courts for the collection of restitution, as well as the clerk of the court, Tina Sinnen. We work with collection of court costs and fines, which is also in conjunction with all of the courts, as well as Colin Stolley, the Commonwealth Attorney. And then the things that people end up really disliking me for is the delinquent collections piece. We really try to encourage people to pay and understand their obligations for their taxes, and although I'm sympathetic, it is my job to do those collections, and sometimes they're a little more forced, and that can include issuing a DMV stop for the non-payment of personal property taxes. We can do wage liens, we can do bank liens, we can issue a judgment, we can do distress. That one we use as an absolute last resort, where we can come in and we can tag, for example, a business's property and sell it at auction if they don't pay their taxes. We participate in the debt set-off program, so when you pay your state taxes, and if you have a refund coming to you, the treasurer's office and other localities can come in and confiscate some of that money to pay the taxes. And we also use an additional collection agency when those delinquent taxes go towards their statute of limitations, so they can assist us in trying to get them before we have to write them off. Our office is responsible for all the refunds related to taxes. We administer online payment applications. We prepare the daily bank deposits. We record the funds in the general ledger. We reconcile all the bank accounts. We liaison with our internal audit department, external auditors, and state auditors. We manage the city's investment portfolio, and what Diana said was it averaged around $700 million back in that time, and it's increased a little bit. As taxes come in, we have more revenue to work with, and then we'll have a lull in between the tax collection periods. We manage the banking relationships, and we try to predict the cash flow. So we talk a lot about debt service payments, making payroll. When you balance your checkbook, we do that on a larger level with the city treasurer's office. So to get into a little bit of details about what my office doesn't do, I think that's important to understand. When we end up being the ones that get all of the complaints about the taxes. So I just want everyone to understand that the city treasurer's office, we don't determine the tax rate. That's something that city council does. We don't determine the assessed value. That's what the real estate assessor's office does, or the commissioner of the revenue's office does. We don't administer the exemption programs, but we can certainly assist in getting you to the right department that can help with whatever types of programs that the City of Virginia Beach offers. I don't administer a business license. That's a responsibility of the Commissioner of the Revenue. For public utilities, we get a whole lot of complaints about the rate and the consumption and all of that. We just take the money. We don't even do the billing for that. With regards to city council, like I said, they determine the tax rates. They can create ordinances that direct the city treasurer's office and other departments to do certain things. They approve the budget, and they determine how the money is spent. That is not a function of the city treasurer's office to decide how to spend the money. That's a budgetary and city council decision. we're guided very much by city code, which is determined by council, and by state code, which is determined by our legislators. So I think it's important before we start talking and you ask me specific questions about what we can do to help. I'm just a small piece of the puzzle for all of the city and the state of what we can do to provide help. And I love to be a resource. I love to help people, point them in the right direction. If I can't help you, then I'm going to find out who can assist you through this process. I'd like to take a quick minute and talk about some of the ordinances that City Council passed last year to help taxpayers and businesses, and then kind of give you a little bit of what my thoughts about how they worked. And first, I'd like to say that all of these were passed with the best intentions, so I think. And no one really could predict how long this pandemic was going to last from a financial aspect. So some of these things I felt were helpful, and some of them I feel like were not as helpful. For one of the ordinance was delaying personal property taxes and real estate taxes from a June 5th due date of last year until an August 3rd due date. I think that that was somewhat helpful. It gave people a little bit of chance to budget a little bit longer for what their tax bills would be. I think it was a show of support to our community that the City of Virginia Beach and City Council was understanding of the economic hardships of the citizens. We did get a lot of complaints that was not done for the December billing or subsequent billings. So communication is really key when City Council or other ones put these new policies in place, and that can be hard to do, to make sure that the masses know about the changes. One of the other ordinances was the meal tax holiday, which for restaurants, part of what they have to do is collect an additional city tax for prepared food on top of sales tax and the cost of the food itself. And what they adopted was a meal tax holiday for May and June of last year. So I think that this was probably a great idea, but it came a little bit late. A lot of businesses have point of sale applications. They have software that they have to change in order to make those adjustments to the taxes that they collect. And if they don't have time to do that, then they're not able to pass along that tax savings to the citizens, because those trust taxes are collected on behalf of the city, and they just hold them in trust. That's why it's called a trust tax. So that one was okay, but when you add a confusion of the next one I'm going to talk about, which is the delaying of trust taxes by 2 months for the months of April, May, and June last year. So the way trust taxes work for businesses is they have a collection period of a particular month. For example, March, they collect the taxes during March, and they have until April the 20th to remit that to the city. Well, what this ended up doing, for example, is it made the taxes that are normally due April 20th of last year due June 20th, the following month's taxes due July 20th, the following month's taxes due August 20th, the following month's taxes due June 20th, and the following due August 20th. So you heard me say a couple months repetitively. What it did is basically just compact everything due in basically July and August. This is the one that I don't feel was beneficial to business owners. It was very confusing. It ended up putting people behind, because some of the stipulations that went along with that is they still had to file. And what that means is they have to collect their gross receipts, the sales that they made in that period, and remit that to the city to calculate the tax. They just didn't have to pay. Well, when it's not communicated fully, or perhaps business owners don't understand the full ramifications, they weren't filing, and if you didn't file, you incur additional penalties. So I think things were done hopefully with good intentions, but it didn't always work out that way for the business owners. So when council was doing all of this, the pandemic happened at a time period, and it came on very quickly. We had already generated most of the bills, so we had to make these changes and accommodations very quickly. But what we kind of foresaw is it was not a comprehensive solution to help businesses. So I sent a letter to the city manager and to city council, and the treasurer's office started a payment plan to help. And not just because it's my office, but I think this was probably the most helpful for businesses who took advantage of this ability to put on a payment plan. And normally before a pandemic, before we ever thought this was going to happen, a payment plan just said you were going to make payments and we wouldn't do any forced collection actions. Well, this one was a little bit different because we were in a state of emergency where we were able to just say, don't pay anything. Don't pay anything. Keep your doors open. Keep your business going. Because quite frankly, if a business closes, I'm never going to get those taxes. We want businesses to be successful. So a good number of businesses signed up for this payment plan, and they could defer their taxes and they would not incur the penalties for late payment as long as they filed their gross receipts every month. And they contacted us when they were able to pay, and when they were able to pay, they could determine what they could pay. So they signed a contract, which helps me collect at a later point in time if they never are able to pay or they end up closing their business. But what it did is allow them to use that income for operations while they were struggling or while they were trying to figure out other grants that they could apply for the PPP programs and all of this. So I really hope that was successful to the community. We had 240 businesses enter into those payment plan agreements, and that started back in late March, early April of last year. And what we've seen is a number of these businesses, they want to do the right thing. They want to keep up with their taxes. And as of this month, we only have 31 left in the payment plan that we initiated. So what they're doing is, as the income becomes available, they're paying that off and catching up and doing the right thing. Just for statistics, I believe that we have about 1,700 restaurant taxes that are being generated right now, and 690 or so lodging accounts right now. So if we had 240 participants, it's not a great number, but where we could help people, we tried. And what my office did is, when this started, we started contacting the businesses and saying, hey, we're offering this. Please jump on board. We want to help you get through these really trying times. So we communicated about that. We communicated when we didn't receive anything from them, when they didn't contact our office at all. We tried to reach out to them. So we had a pretty good outreach program going on during this time period. We tried not to do too many field visits, but if we couldn't get a hold of them any other way, we would go out to their restaurant or their hotel or whatever the business is to try to assist them with this process. And that's the thing about the treasurer's office. Like I said, we're probably one of the most hated departments in the city because of what we do. But what we ask is that when citizens are in a hardship or when businesses are having a hard time, that they reach out to us. I can't change the laws. I can't change the tax rate. I can't change the assessed value. But what I can do is not be really mean and do the liens, shut your business down, because we want you to be successful. So we can talk about what we can do to help businesses through these trying times. Diana contacted me after she asked me to speak and said that she did a FOIA request for the number of businesses that have closed over from, I think was it March 1st? Right, for about a year's time. Yeah, and I think there was there about almost 1,200 businesses have shut down, and she forwarded that list to me. And although I can absolutely not speak about individual businesses, we did a quick review of that. And some businesses come in and they shut down very quickly. Some businesses just don't take off, and that's pretty normal for some businesses to do that. But we went through that list, and we tried to pick out some of the ones, because that was a lot to review individually. And we saw about 100 or so that were restaurants, hotels, which I think were struggling the most out of the industry. And out of those 100 or so, we had about 15 that had signed up for our treasurer's office payment plan, but still weren't able to make it and ended up having to close. Just real quickly, I can't answer a ton of questions, but the City of Virginia Beach also offered some additional help, particularly with taxes and people's water bill. Just a few comments from me about that. The one for the water bill, there were certain requirements that they had to apply for to be eligible for that help. And I appreciated that program because they were eligible for a certain dollar amount, and that dollar amount was sent to the city treasurer's office to pay their public utilities account. They weren't doing cutoffs at the time, but it helped them keep going. The other one that was specific for personal property tax and real estate taxes was administered by the Department of Human Services. And there were income qualifications and amounts of money that they could qualify, limitations on that amount of money. And what they did in that case is if they met all of those qualifications, they issued a check to the taxpayer who qualified. And their reasoning was you could reimburse. If they had already paid their taxes, it was a reimbursement. But basically, they were just issuing checks to the taxpayers with the intent to pay the taxes. Well, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. The point was to bring in the revenue for the taxes, and hopefully they did, but I'm going to guess that some of them they didn't. They used it for whatever they needed, good or bad. Just recently it was announced there's a nonprofit grant program, and applications are being accepted through May 14th for that. And then the Department of Economic Development also had some programs for businesses to help them through the pandemic. I don't know a whole lot about that because it didn't directly affect the city treasurer's office. So before I have one other thing to share, I wanted to see if anyone had any specific questions that they would like to ask.
I got one question. What's the difference between your office, the city treasurer's office, and the commissioner of revenue? What's the difference between the two? Is one a state office, one a city, or how does that work?
Nope, they're both city offices. We do receive funding from the state because we're elected offices, and there is a specific segregation of duties. The Commissioner of the Revenue's office is responsible for the assessment of the taxes and administering business licenses mainly. I'm being very high level here. And that is done specifically by them, and then my office is responsible for the collections of that. So I believe in that segregation of duties because you don't want the same person assessing and collecting because, I mean, what could happen? Nothing. No revenue. Or maybe a lot of revenue. It depends on the situation. Yeah. Frank?
You had mentioned that 1,200 businesses were shut down or had shut down during that 1 year.
Yes.
How is that relationship to years prior? Is that, like you said, some businesses normally shut down. Is that much higher or is that a little higher?
I can't answer that specifically. I know that there's a lot of businesses that open and close. That information came from the Commissioner of the Revenue's office because it's related to business license information, and they administer that program. I can't see anything related to business licenses on my side of the house.
All right.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Do you have any idea when and how much they're going to increase the taxes?
That would be a great question for City Council.
Can you repeat the question so we get it on?
Absolutely. He said, do I have any idea how much they're going to increase the taxes? So I believe that City Council is looking to increase the real estate tax, but I will tell you, even this year, because that budget is for the following year, this year, I believe overall, the real estate assessment values, although the tax rate didn't change, went up just over 3%. So some people are paying a little more in taxes because of the assessed value, and some people are paying a little less. Personal property overall went up this current year because of the assessments. What happened with the assessments is last year, interest rates were very low, and used cars in particular were more bought and sold, and there was a greater demand for them. So that created an increased value according to NADA, which is the National Auto Dealers Association, who supplies the assessment information. Along with that, the state funding that we get to offset personal property tax, which is Governor Gilmore implemented it, a personal property tax relief. The percent that was allowable to offset the taxes last year, I believe, was 50.1%. And this year, the taxes you're paying due June 7th is, I think it's 46.8%. So because of the assessments, the taxes we're a little bit higher this year, which, is unfortunate because people are still struggling. Regarding future tax rates, that's more of a question for City Council, but it sounds like the increase in the real estate tax will probably be approved. Yes, sir.
If you already know if you've already received all your taxes, there's already above and beyond from last year. And your vehicles and your home has already been up already. So I'm not here to just challenge that, but it's above and beyond. I've owned my house for 30 years and my vehicles, and it continues to go up. Why do I have to continue to pay that price so much? And I've already paid my house off and my vehicles. Why do we have to continue to pay these taxes on these vehicles in our homes?
That's a great question for your City Council.
City Council.
Yes, sir.
Fair enough, I just want to get my voice, but I appreciate that.
Sure. Where's Teresa? Hey.
Yes. I just wanted to know, because you talked about the amount of businesses that were dissolved. Are those just restaurants and businesses? Because you have vendors from the Neptune Festival, from the Strawberry Festival, and a numerous amount of small business that actually did lose a terribly amount of money because of the shutdowns that we had. Is there a way you can keep track of that in the city?
I do not, but I do have a copy of the report that Diana requested through the FOIA request. I'm sure she would be willing to share that information since it is public information. It came from the Commissioner of Revenue with I think it's 1,181 businesses in there. And you're right, there are a lot of small businesses. Some of them maybe have been around for a while. It has the closure date, but it doesn't have the start date on it.
Would you not see that in the tax revenue coming in from them?
I would see that from a big picture financial side, but I'm not privy to the information on the business license side to see the individual accounts. Ron, and then I'll come to you, Reed.
Do you know what the breakdown is between personal property taxes paid by citizens versus taxes paid by businesses?
I do not, but I can try to find that for you.
Okay.
Reed?
So just a broader question that you would have, pre-pandemic and then post-pandemic, do you have a sense of how much loss in percentage of revenue your office has been taking in as a result of the pandemic?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, he asked pre-pandemic compared to now, or not quite post-pandemic, what is the decrease in the revenue that's coming in? And I'm going to talk generically because I don't have those numbers in front of me, but real estate taxes have stayed pretty consistent. And part of that is because more than half of the parcels in Virginia Beach that are residential have a mortgage on them. And if you keep up with your mortgage, you probably have an escrow, so they're paying those taxes. So real estate is held pretty consistent. Personal property has seen a slight decline in the revenue that has come in, and that I would expect because a lot of that is personal cars. Regarding that, some of it may be business where we've seen a decline in that, but from experience in the treasurer's office, we get the calls, we get the I've been sick, I had COVID, my business is closed. We get a lot of the personal information from the citizens. So yes, a slight decrease in personal property. And to add to that, last year we didn't do forced collections during the prime of the pandemic. And I say that we didn't do liens, we didn't take money from people's bank or their employment. We try to give people the benefit of the doubt. We very slowly started that in November, December timeframe. And now it's really the people who are very egregious in the amount of tax that they owe to. We just need to make contact with them. And sometimes you can't make contact with someone until you do something more dramatic with that. One more thing for your question. In regards to the trust taxes, that is where we've seen the most significant hit in the revenue, mostly in the hotels, the lodging tax, and the restaurant tax. And that's what we've tried to focus on with the payment plans that we initiated in the treasurer's office, because they're struggling. And when we talk to these businesses, they're really trying to make things work, but some of the things that have given them opportunity, for instance, having outdoor dining, and maybe they rent a tent so that people have some shade. That's an additional cost for the rent. It's a monthly cost for the tent. It increases their insurance. We've heard stories like that. In addition, recently, it sounds like restaurants and other businesses are having a hard time hiring people. So when I talked to a restaurant owner recently, he was telling me about this, and the employees that are coming to work are having to work more than 40 hours a week in order to keep that business running, and then he has to pay them time and a half, which is an additional expense to them. So we feel their pain, and we hear their stories all the time.
So my follow-on was the meals tax, which is paid for by us that live here. How much of a decline did you see in the meals tax?
The meals tax took the most significant decline of all of it, and that's because the businesses collect that on behalf of the city. Again, why it's called a trust tax. And if they are not getting the business, and the peak of the number of delinquencies that we had was back in the July and August time frame. We see by the number of delinquencies that things are starting to get better, but there are still a number of businesses out there struggling. Did you have a question?
What about the depot tax? That's the true tax that individual businesses pay, which I would call it another name, for an individual business to pay on their personal property. That should be a good gauge of what.
BPOL is completely out of my office. It's administered 100% by the Commissioner of the Revenue.
You don't collect that?
We take the money and deposit the money, but we do not do collections on business license.
So I'm saying the drop in that compared to the meal tax and the other
Right.
stream of it.
Right.
Was that on par, or is that?
I can't answer that because I don't administer that program, but what I will say is that it's base business license. There's different thresholds, but it is also based on the income, your gross receipts from the prior year. So if they had a significant decrease in their business receipts from the prior year, then potentially, depending on where they fall in that spectrum, the tax they pay would be less. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a way for you to tell, like, how many people have gone bankrupt? How many people have left?
I don't know about the left, but my office does handle bankruptcy for the city because most of the collections are in my office, and we have seen a much higher uptick in bankruptcies. And what that does for my office is it stops all collection activities until the court determines the next steps, whether it's discharged, dismissed, or sometimes they're transferred from different chapters. A dramatic increase in the number of bankruptcies, yes. Yes. Ron, did you have another one?
No.
I'll wait to
No, I was going to ask, the city keeps saying we're doing so much better than they expected, right? That they're, raising all this money and increasing stuff. So I'm wondering if businesses are closing, you're not getting all the revenue that you used to getting, what money is it they're getting? You're depositing it, so what money? Where are they getting the money from? Is it the
Could you summarize the question?
Yes, the question was, we have a bunch of closed businesses, but the city is advertising that we're doing much better than we expected. And I think that perspective is when we went into the pandemic, they went in with a conservative nature of budgeting where they thought we were only going to collect half of what we were trying to collect. So they tried to budget to that effect, and we've actually done better than we ourselves, city, internally expected us to do. So I don't know if that's not great. That's not on par with prior years before a pandemic, but it's better than we budgeted and expected to do. Right. Let me get Robert.
Well, this leads to not question, it's an observation. About 2 weeks ago, I was eating in a very large restaurant here, one of the highest grossing restaurants in the area, and this gentleman had a problem with some tax problems that he had. I called up Lee for him, and they had a meeting that very same day. It was resolved, and he said she was one of the nicest people that he's ever met working for the government and all of her staff and everything else. So publicly, I would just like to pass those accolades on to her. And just so you know, yesterday he was working in the kitchen. This is a gigantic restaurant because he cannot find help because people are getting all this government help. Lastly, the meal tax in the city of Virginia Beach is 11.5%. It is tied third with the highest in the nation, higher than New York, every major city. So sometime maybe the city council will change their mind, and maybe Councilman Moss, who now arrived, will address that later. Thank you, Lee.
So just one comment. I could be wrong, but I believe city tax is 5.5% and sales tax is 6%.
Meal tax comes out to 11.5%.
For all the taxes. Yes. But part is state, part city.
Yeah.
Yes, Teresa.
One thing that interests me, because you have communities around that have pools and recreation facilities, but because of people struggling with money, have there been any of those closed or struggling, like Larkspur and different ones that might, or does that not know that?
I don't know.
Question, we couldn't hear it about.
She was talking about organizations that have pools and those type of facilities. Do I know if the city is helping them and if they've had to close and struggle?
How all of this is affecting the whole city?
Well, I think it's significantly affecting the whole city, and I don't know specifically who you're talking about, but admissions tax, where you pay to get into somewhere, if they've had to close, that's going to be a significant hurt on their business as well.
I think a lot of those were closed, like Ocean Breeze Busch Garden.
Movie
all
theaters.
of them.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, all those were closed, they're just starting to open up.
It's, yeah.
Yeah. Any more questions?
So, if not, I just have one more thing to add. You guys may have, if you live in Virginia Beach, you may have received this little insert in your personal property and or real estate tax bills when they got mailed out last week. But I wanted to make everyone aware that we're holding our 3rd annual unclaimed property event. And it's virtual again. The first year was in person, the second last year, and this year will be virtual. I was very hesitant about the virtual. I didn't think it was going to work out very well, but we had a lot of great participation, and it's kind of nice to facilitate a process where potentially we could help give people money back. And unclaimed property is if you had a refund check from somewhere that you never cashed, or you had a bank account that went dormant that still had money in it, or you had stocks or bonds or something to that effect that went dormant. Most of those organizations are required to remit those funds to the State Department of Unclaimed Property, where it sits until it's claimed. So this is where contact information where you can contact the state and see if you have any of that unclaimed property. And just to share a few statistics about the success of this. The first year that we did this, we were able to facilitate the return of about $226,000 to our citizens. And last year, we were able to facilitate about $184,000 going back to the citizens. So from my perspective, I'm usually in the business of taking people's money. So it feels really good to facilitate a process where if you have that money for unclaimed property, we can help get it back to you. So I have some brochures that and Nelson came and stood in line for like, an hour and a half the first year that we did it, and
the first year, and I got a $50 back.
$50. So
It was a rebate check from Epson printer or something.
yeah,
Been floating around forever.
yeah. So I have some brochures on this. If you didn't get them in your tax bills, I'd be happy to pass them out. And it's just a phone call. So hopefully, and you don't have to do it during this time either. You can go to their website and do a quick search and see if you have any of those funds. So thank you for having me.
That's only for Virginia Beach. Do other cities do that as well?
Well, I'm just facilitating it, but it's for anything that's held by the state of Virginia.
Anything that's held by, so somebody in Chesapeake
Absolutely.
can also call you on that?
Yes.
Awesome.
Sure.
Right, so that's, if you're missing money, you don't even know, you can just call up and say, my name's such and such, do you have any money funds?
Yes, you'll have to give your social security number, some address history if you've moved around, but you can even go to their website. I can't remember it right now because she took the paperwork, but you can do a preliminary search. If you call during that time period, they'll collect all the information they need to get that process going and get you your refund check.
It's interesting.
All right.
Lee Anderson, let's hear it for him.
There's a question in the back. You want to get that question?
Sure.
Oh, last question. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. The checks, we're having a problem. Checks are being taken and washed. If you don't get a check and it's late, you notify the people that the check has not been received. Or do we get fined and then you pay the check when it's late anyway?
So I don't know whether you sent me a check or not. His question was, there has been some news stories lately where people have put their mail in the post office boxes at the post office, and it appears that someone is going in there taking the mail out. They're washing the check, which means they're changing the payee information, the numerical dollar amount and the written out dollar amount, keeping the signature, keeping the bank account numbers at the bottom and cashing it. It happened recently to a family friend of mine who was paying their public utilities bill. If you send me a check, I don't know about that. So the best thing to do for someone that happens to is to file a fraud case with their bank, which you're going to do because they're going to take your $6,000 if you have it in your bank account. and then file also a claim with the United States Postal Service. And there have been quite a few of those recently. I think Wavy TV10 has covered some of those news stories on their site specifically that I've shared with the individuals in my office, because we obviously we want to get your money for the appropriate amount.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank
Linda.
you.
I didn't bring up any drawers.
I want to rebate.
Okay, in anticipation of all the questions on the real estate tax and how much the city is spending, I also invited Councilman Moss to come up and address those issues for you. So we're going to have a round of applause for our City Councilman, John Moss.
Well, I'll probably do best just by answering questions but I will make a few remarks. How many people in here watched the council meeting last Tuesday? Yes. They spent all of 28 minutes on $2.2 billion. And we had a lot of people who spoke at the public hearing. About half of, well, I'll say a third spoke on reducing the real estate rate to the revenue neutral amount. Many of you probably know how the state law reads. It says that any localities whose tax base increases more than 1%, the default rate becomes the revenue neutral rate, which for Virginia Beach would be 0.9887. That would have been the rate unless the city council holds a public hearing and does a published announcement, which they did do. Then by a vote, they vote to increase taxes. So when anyone tells you they have reduced the real estate tax rate in the reconciliation budget to $1, that is not true, or we wouldn't be having a public vote. But we have to vote, and the vote is to increase the tax rate. So we are not getting a tax rate reduction. And unless your home is one of the few homes that didn't go up the average, so the citywide average for all real estate was 3.7%, homes on average went up 4.5%, hotels fell by 10%, so you gotta carry about the numbers that people use. So even a revenue tax neutral rate still means most homeowners, their tax bill will be higher than it was last year, so you are getting a tax bill increase even with the revenue rate. So most people's tax bill is going up, and that is, anybody who says otherwise is doing what you would call material misrepresentation, to be kind. The other thing you'll hear is that we have the lowest tax rate. Who's heard that? The lowest real tax. Now who thinks that's true? Well, it is true if you don't normalize the rate. And you say, well, what do you mean by that? Well, there is one city in Hampton Roads that includes their trash bill is included in their real estate tax rate, so they don't get a monthly trash bill, and that's the city of Chesapeake. So Chesapeake has a rate of $1.05. We're proposing a rate of $1. That's the majority. That's not me. The majority. But if you take the $37,367,000 and some change and convert that into a tax rate, our tax rate would be $1.06. So we really aren't the lowest when you do apple to apple. Now, in all fairness, and I've said this, we do offer a lot more services for our dollar than does the city of Chesapeake. But think about it, Chesapeake doesn't have tourism. So it's amazing that they can accomplish what they do without tourism, though that does help us pay for some of the things we have. So where did all the money go? Because the city manager, to his, though I will say Patrick and I didn't agree on everything, I thought I wanted no more than a 2% pay raise. I thought that was, in light of the economy, that made sense. But I could support 3, and that's what Patrick recommended. He passed through the school board's request because under the funding formula, we are very limited what they can do with the operating budget. Though we have reduced taxes, does take some money away from the school system, but they got $90 million of money they weren't anticipating, so I really don't feel bad for them. The other part of that is that when you look at what's going on, we could have done more. But one thing he didn't do, which I wish he would have, and the council majority, is what's our biggest #1 priority in Virginia Beach? Besides police, flooding. And what's the most critical asset, the most limiting asset that the city has? The ability to borrow money. We have really, when we bought up the Sportsplex for $65 million, we did the music hall for $30 million, we did the dome site $72 million, about $200 million worth of debt borrowing capacity on our credit availability went away. Well, the school asked for additional $69 million of borrowing authority to accelerate school modernization. And my point has been, a dry home is more important than a renovated school, and that we should be putting our money towards our first priority, which is flood mitigation. But that isn't so what really happened in the end is everybody came up, I'm the only one that came up with, on my list, was to reduce the tax rate to revenue neutral rate. That was my one request. And that was the request of many people who showed up at the public hearing. But the only requests that got granted were the people who want something. And so the city council members, for the most part, were very accommodating. So everybody's getting something except the taxpayers, which are getting nothing in terms of tax relief in a very tough time. I'm going to talk about a topic which people here will not find, maybe not like my answer, but I thought that Carolyn Weems and Ms. Hughes and Vicki Manning had the right approach in the school board budget when they said, yes, teachers deserve a big raise, and they do. But everybody in the school system doesn't merit getting a 5% raise, and they were absolutely correct. Well, the manager recommended a 3% raise, which in this economy is a substantial pay increase.